The suffering of love comes less from the other person and more from what we lose inside ourselves when they leave. Roland Barthes. Losing someone isn't just about dealing with their absence. It's dealing with the absence of who we were alongside them. Because a relationship isn't just an exchange between two people. It's a shared identity, a space where we recognize ourselves, a reflection that defines us. And when that space breaks down, it's not just the other person who disappears. Something inside us also falls apart. You wake up. Everything is in the same place. The bed, the ceiling, the clock ticking. But something inside you has changed. The air seems heavier. The days drag on with a strange silence. And that emptiness in your chest is almost unbearable. Someone who used to be part of your world is no longer there. But why does it hurt so much? You're not physically hurt. There are no visible wounds, no broken bones. And yet, everything in you screams with pain. A perfume forgotten on the pillow, a song playing on the radio, a random conversation that suddenly brings everything back to mind. The person has gone, but their absence continues to take up space. Science can explain some of this. Your brain is going through a real chemical breakdown, like an addict in withdrawal. Memories become triggers, rekindling the pain again and again. You try to move on, but your mind won't cooperate. But what if this pain isn't just chemical? What if it reveals something much deeper about who we really are? Love has always been described as something sublime, something that completes us. But no one teaches us what to do when it falls apart. And perhaps that's the greatest irony. The same feeling that makes us feel alive is the one that, in an instant, can make us feel like we're nothing. But is the pain of the end just a consequence of love? Or does it expose a truth that we try to ignore? Perhaps losing someone is deep down a way of losing ourselves too. And if you've never experienced it, one day you might, because that's the price of loving. That's the question we're going to explore today. Welcome to the true impact of the end of a love. If someone told you that you were suffering from a withdrawal crisis, would you believe them? It sounds like an exaggeration, but it's not. When love comes to an end, the brain reacts as if it were being deprived of a powerful drug. Neuroscience has proven that being in love activates the same brain areas as addiction to substances such as cocaine and heroin. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter of pleasure and reward, is released in large quantities during a relationship, creating a feeling of euphoria, connection, and belonging. But when this source of pleasure disappears, the system collapses. Dopamine activation plummets, levels of oxytocin, known as the love hormone, drop sharply, and the brain enters a state of deprivation, sending out desperate search signals. This is why, after a breakup, we think obsessively about the other person, feel an uncontrollable desire to get back together, and relive every memory as if it were a scene frozen in time. The brain doesn't accept loss easily. It wants the drug back. Are the pain of love and physical pain the same thing? If you've been through a difficult breakup, you know that it's not just emotional, it's physical. A study by psychologist Naomi Eisenberger from the University of California showed that love rejection activates the same region of the brain associated with physical pain, the anterior cingulate cortex. This means that for the brain, being dumped by someone can be as painful as getting burned or breaking a bone. This would explain why we feel that pressure in our chest, the shortness of breath, the lump in our throat. The brain is literally registering the loss as a real wound. And worse, unlike a burn or a fracture, this pain can't be cured with painkillers or a plaster cast. It infiltrates our routine, our sleep, our diet, and the little memories of everyday life. Why can't we stop thinking about the person? What makes it difficult is that the brain doesn't want you to forget easily. It's conditioned to reinforce connections that were once essential for your emotional survival. Every little detail, a photo, a song, a smell, sets off an internal trigger, rekindling the pain and prolonging the obsession. And that's where one of the biggest villains of a breakup comes in: mental rumination. Rumination is that endless cycle of thoughts in which the mind repeats the same scenes, tries to find explanations, relive dialogues, look for missed signals. This happens because the brain is trying to solve a problem that actually has no solution. And the more you think about it, the stronger that pain becomes. A study by Columbia University showed that people who keep mentally reliving the breakup experience higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, and find it harder to recover emotionally. This explains why some breakups feel like a maze with no way out. The brain traps us in it, But why does this pain last so long? If love were just a feeling, it might be easier to get rid of it. But love is first and foremost a habit. Psychologist John Cacioppo, a specialist in social neuroscience, has shown that the emotional bond is not only psychological, but also biological. When we live with someone for a long time, our brain adapts to their presence as part of our neural routine. In other words, love becomes a pattern installed in your system. That's why a breakup isn't just an emotional loss. It's a break in the mental structure. Like an addiction that needs to be fought with total abstinence, it takes time for the brain to reorganize its circuits and learn to function without that constant presence. But then an even deeper question arises. Do we suffer only because of the person's absence, or because of the future we imagine with them? Because perhaps the worst pain is not losing the other person, but losing everything we thought we would still experience together. Wake up, work, pay bills, sleep, and repeat it all over again the next day. Life goes by like this, and one day you realize that time has slipped away. Dreams were postponed. Opportunities went unnoticed. This happens because no one ever taught you how to see the game of life the right way. But there is another path. If you want to reach the next level, you need to access new knowledge. And that's exactly what you'll find in the White Rabbit Codes. This book will open your eyes to what is really happening. You'll understand why you keep getting stuck in the same cycles, learn how to escape autopilot, and start seeing the opportunities that were always there. And finally, you'll make decisions that truly lead to the life you've always wanted. If you feel ready for this change, the link is in the pinned comment. You'll be surprised at how simple it can be to increase your prosperity. Success is a decision. The choice is yours. When a relationship ends, it's not just one person who leaves. Something bigger falls apart. The future we imagined, the plans that seemed certain, the life we hadn't lived yet. We suffer less for the physical absence of the other person and more for the absence of what we could have been alongside them. Because love isn't just made up of memories, it's made up of possibilities. Every conversation about the future, every detail planned, every dream shared builds something that, in our minds, already existed. So when it's over, we're not just dealing with an end, we deal with a death. The death of the we created. In the first few days, the absence of the person seems overwhelming. But over time, we realize that what really haunts us isn't just the person. It's the house that was never built, the trips that never happened, the children who were never born, the future that until yesterday seemed as real as the present. And the cruelest thing is that our brains can't tell the difference between what's real and what's imagined. For it, what we once took for granted has been recorded as part of our identity. Neuroscience proves that our prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning the future, treats these projections as memories that have already been lived. In other words, the future we created with someone wasn't just a daydream. For our minds, it was already part of our history, and now it needs to be forcibly ripped away. This is why so many people, after a breakup, feel that they have lost a part of themselves. Psychologists call this relational self-expansion. When we enter a relationship, our identity merges with that of the other person. We pick up habits, we change tastes, we become someone different within that us that was built. And when the relationship ends, what's left is a strange emptiness. Who am I without this person? What's left of me now that half my identity has dissolved? Pablo Neruda wrote that love is born of the desire to make eternal what is fleeting. But love has never been eternal. It has always been a house without foundations. We spend years building sandcastles, ignoring the fact that the tide always comes in. Because human beings have this habit of believing that certain things will last forever, even when life itself proves that everything is impermanent. The human brain can't erase memories. It can reorganize them, weaken them over time, but they never disappear completely. And perhaps that's why certain endings haunt us for so long. Because, on a deep level, we don't just miss the person, we miss the version of ourselves that existed alongside them. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls this the tyranny of memory. For him, we don't just cry for what we've lost, but for what we were while we were living that story. When we hear a song, smell a perfume, or see a place that reminds us of someone, what really hits us is not the memory of the person. It's the memory of who we were with them. And this is perhaps the true grief of love, because nobody teaches us how to deal with this loss. We're told to move on, to find someone else, to turn the page. But how do we move on when part of who we were is stuck in the past? How do we rebuild something that we're not even sure where it broke? The truth is that the loss of another person forces us to face something even deeper, the need to rebuild ourselves. But this reconstruction is not always easy, because the way we suffer from a lost love doesn't just depend on who we were within that relationship. It depends on something much older. From the moment we are born, we learn what love is through the first bonds we create. Parents, caregivers, figures who taught us, even without meaning to, whether love is safe or threatening. And those first bonds leave invisible but deep marks. Perhaps that's why some people are able to move on more quickly, while others are stuck in pain, because the love we received in the past defines the love we can release in the present. Why do some people manage to move on after a breakup, while others are stuck in pain for months or even years? What makes someone say goodbye with maturity, while another despairs of trying to get back together? The answer may lie long before the relationship begins. From birth, we learn what love is through the first bonds we create, the way we were welcomed, protected, and loved in childhood shapes, in an invisible way, the way we connect and say goodbye in adulthood. And this has a name: attachment theory. Psychologist John Bowlby realized that babies don't just cry when they are separated from their mothers. They experience genuine grief, as if they were being abandoned. Over time, he realized that these attachment patterns don't disappear as we grow up. They become the way we bond with romantic partners. If we grow up with emotional security, we learn to love in a healthy way. But if love has taught us fear, uncertainty, or instability, we carry this into future relationships, often without realizing it. Generally speaking, there are three main patterns of attachment that directly influence how we deal with love loss. Secure attachment is developed by those who grew up in a stable environment, where love didn't come with conditions or threats. These are people who, when they enter a relationship, feel comfortable with intimacy, but also know how to deal with individuality. When a breakup happens, they suffer, but understand that pain is part of the process and move on. Those with anxious attachment, on the other hand, had a childhood marked by emotional unpredictability. Love wasn't always guaranteed, so they learned to fight to keep it at any cost. As adults, they feel a constant fear of being abandoned, and after a breakup, they often enter a cycle of obsession, looking for answers, trying to reverse the situation, or self-sabotaging with guilt and regret. On the other hand, avoidant attachment develops in people who have learned that love is not synonymous with security, but with vulnerability and pain. They often grew up in environments where emotional expression was discouraged or ignored. As a defense, they create an effective block, and when a relationship ends, they convince themselves that they never really needed it. They appear cold, but deep down they feel the pain. They just don't know how to deal with it. And here's the problem. People with anxious and avoidant attachments often attract each other. The anxious seek closeness. The avoidant need distance. The anxious want connection. The avoidant run away from it. This toxic dynamic is one of the main reasons for painful breakups, because one always feels that the other doesn't love enough, while the other feels that they are being suffocated. Imagine a child who has learned from an early age that love is something unstable that can be taken away at any time. This child grows up to be an adult who accepts emotional crumbs, who confuses intensity with affection, and who, when they lose someone, feels they have lost their own identity. Now, imagine another child who has learned that showing feelings is a sign of weakness. This child grows up to be an adult who runs away from any deep bond, who distances themselves emotionally, and who, when a relationship ends, convinces themselves that they never really cared. These patterns are repeated throughout life because the brain seeks familiarity, even when that familiarity hurts us. And the only way to break this cycle is to see it. I want to raise an even deeper question. What if the way we love is just a reflection of what we believe about love? For centuries, philosophers have tried to decipher this mystery. Schopenhauer saw love as a biological trick. Sartre saw passion as an existential prison. Nietzsche believed that love should transform us. Kierkegaard saw love as a spiritual challenge. What if we're suffering not because love has ended, but because of the idea we've created about it? Perhaps the pain isn't in what we've lost, but in the illusion we've nurtured. Is love real, or just an illusion we invent to make sense of life? Since ancient times, We have tried to understand this feeling that builds and destroys us. Poets praise it, scientists reduce it to chemistry, and philosophers question it. If love were an absolute truth, why have so many thinkers come to such different conclusions about it? Perhaps because love has never been an answer, but a question. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, saw love as a cruel trick of nature. For him, everything we feel when we fall in love, desire, connection, the idea of destiny, is just a biological illusion to ensure the reproduction of the species. Love, according to him, doesn't exist to make us happy, but to make us slaves to a cycle that overtakes us. This view may seem cynical, but there is a grain of truth to it. What we call intense passion is directly linked to bursts of dopamine, the same substance involved in the search for rewards. And just like a drug, love hooks us on the promise of pleasure, but charges a high price when it's over. Jean-Paul Sartre saw the issue in an even darker light. For him, love is not a pure feeling, but a form of imprisonment. His famous phrase, "Hell is other people," doesn't mean that other people are bad, but that we depend on them to validate our existence. Sartre believed that when we love someone, we project our expectations and desires onto them, expecting them to define us, to complete us, and in doing so, we become their hostages. Love, according to Sartre, doesn't liberate, it enslaves. But if love is a trap, why do we keep falling into it? Friedrich Nietzsche saw it differently. For him, love is not an illusion to be unmasked, but an experience capable of transforming us. In his philosophy, suffering is not an enemy, but a catalyst for evolution. He wrote, "You have to have chaos inside you to give birth to a dancing star." For Nietzsche, a breakup should not be seen as a failure, but as an opportunity. We don't suffer because we love, but because we resist the change that this love, or its loss, can bring us. The real mistake is not in love itself, but in how we cling to it for fear of reinventing ourselves. Kierkegaard, on the other hand, saw love in an even deeper way. For him, love was not just an emotion or a desire, but a spiritual journey. He believed that human love would always be full of flaws, because we expect it to fulfill us in a way that only a greater quest could do. According to Kierkegaard, a breakup is first and foremost a confrontation with our own existence. It forces us to deal with impermanence, to accept that nothing can be possessed forever. If love is an illusion, then perhaps the pain of a breakup is just the shock of this truth. But what if the problem isn't love, but what we've been taught about it? Culture, cinema, social media, they all construct an idealized vision of love, making us believe that there is one perfect person, one happy ending, one set destiny. What if this expectation is the real trap? If you've ever suffered for love, it may not have been just because of the person you lost. It may have been because of what you were taught about love. From an early age, we are bombarded with stories that make us believe in a very specific idea of romance, the existence of a soulmate, the love that overcomes any obstacle, the couple who, after all the difficulties, end up together in the end. But what if this expectation is the real cause of the pain? Because the reality of love rarely looks like a Hollywood script. Not every relationship is meant to last. Not every passion is eternal. And love doesn't always win in the end. Even so, we live in a world that conditions us to believe otherwise. From fairy tales to romantic comedies, love is portrayed as a magical, inevitable, unbreakable force. The princess meets the prince, they face challenges, but in the end, they end up happily ever after. The problem is that, in real life, the credits don't roll after the final kiss. Routine begins, differences arise, and often what seemed perfect falls apart. And when that happens, the pain intensifies because we feel that something has gone wrong, as if we were failing to achieve an ideal we were promised. The movie La La Land deconstructs exactly this illusion. The story follows two characters who are deeply in love, but who, in the end, don't stay together. They don't stop loving each other, but their lives take different directions. There are no villains, no betrayal, just reality. Love and dreams don't always follow the same path. And this is a truth that popular culture often refuses to show. But if movies create an unattainable ideal, social networks do even worse. They prolong the pain and prevent emotional closure. Before the digital age, when a relationship ended, contact was naturally cut off. The person disappeared from your life and, over time, the absence helped you get over it. Today, this is almost impossible. Your ex is still present in some way. A story, a comment, a photo posted months later, and suddenly you find yourself revisiting the past, comparing, trying to understand if the other person has moved on before you. The worst thing is that what we see online rarely reflects the truth. People share what they want others to see, not what they really feel. The person may be suffering, but will only post moments of happiness. And this creates a cruel illusion. While you feel like you're stuck in pain, the other person seems to be having the time of their life. Studies by Brunel University have shown that people who continue to monitor their ex-partners on social media find it harder to get over a breakup. The simple act of viewing the other person's life activates the same neural circuits that reinforce emotional pain. But this is not just a problem of the digital age. The way we deal with breakups is also influenced by the cultural environment in which we grew up. In Western societies, love is seen as an individual quest, the idea of finding the right person and building a perfect romance. In Asian or Middle Eastern countries, love is often perceived in a more collective way, as part of a social and family balance. This completely changes the way people deal with breakups. In Japan, for example, there is a concept called gaman, which teaches you to endure pain with dignity, without showing weakness. In some parts of India, arranged marriages are still common, and the idea of choosing someone to love is seen as a Western concept. What does this show us? That the pain of love isn't just a personal experience, it's amplified by the context we're in. Maybe it's not love that hurts us so much, but the way we've been taught to see it. And when we start to question these beliefs, a new question arises. What now? How do you reinvent yourself after everything falls apart? That's the last piece of the puzzle, and that's what we're going to explore now. Is this content making you reflect and sparking new ways of thinking? If so, click the super thanks button just below the video. It's a way to say thank you and help me bring more content like this to those who need to reflect on life. Every breakup marks an end. But what if, instead of just seeing the loss, we saw it as the start of something new? When a relationship ends, it's not just the person who leaves. Something inside us also dies. The me that existed within that relationship no longer makes sense. The routines, the habits, the little daily rituals. Everything dissolves into thin air, and what's left is an emptiness. But this void is not just pain, it's also an open space for reconstruction. The Japanese have a concept called ma, which means the space between things. It's the pause between notes that gives rhythm to music, the silence between words that gives meaning to speech. The void, far from being something negative, is what allows for creation. An ending is exactly that, a space between who we were and who we can still be. At first, the mind resists. The brain hates change because it represents uncertainty. During a relationship, our neural connections mold themselves to the other person. We create emotional associations that make a simple smell, song, or place instantly trigger memories. That's why, at the end of a love affair, we feel like we're in withdrawal. But neuroscience proves that the brain is malleable. This process of adaptation is called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to create new pathways and redefine emotional patterns. In other words, as impossible as it may seem, you can reprogram your feelings. But in order to do this, you have to allow grief to happen. Many people try to skip this phase, looking for distractions or new relationships before they're ready. But avoiding the pain doesn't make it go away. It just buries it deeper. The only way out of an emotional bereavement is to go through it. Joseph Campbell, who studied the myth of the hero's journey, said that every true transformation requires a descent into the unknown. Before you can be reborn, you have to die. That's why so many characters in epic stories face moments of darkness before finding their true strength. The same happens in real life. The pain of a breakup can be the push you needed for a bigger change. Think about the most transformative moments in your life. How many of them were born out of a moment of pain? A breakup, however difficult, brings the opportunity to redefine priorities, rebuild self-esteem, and create a new identity. This doesn't mean erasing the past, but integrating it. What have you learned from this relationship? What has changed in you? How can you use this experience to grow instead of losing yourself in it? Because after all, maybe love was never about finding someone, but about finding yourself again and again after each loss. Well, I'd like to leave you with a final thought. Have we learned this lesson? We've been taught that love is something we find in someone else, but we've never been told that it can also be something we create within ourselves. We were never told that a breakup doesn't have to be just an end. It can be a new beginning. Because pain doesn't mean that something went wrong. It means that something was real. And if it was real, then it wasn't in vain. The truth is that no one comes out of a great love unscathed. Every relationship shapes us, transforms us, teaches us something about who we are and who we can be. Love is not a safe harbor. It's an ocean. And trying to control it only drowns us. But learning to navigate it, that sets us free. So maybe the question isn't, when will I get over it? But rather, what am I going to do with everything I've learned so far? If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You're subscribed to the channel, you watch the videos, you reflect on every idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to take this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the White Rabbit Codes is ready for you. The link is in the pinned comment. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.